Imagine living in a neighborhood so rough. Even the streetlights seem nervous. Now imagine Rodney Dangerfield walking through it, cracking jokes that hit harder than any punch. What happened on Carson's stage that night? You're about to find out. Rodney Dangerfield walked onto Johnny Carson's Tonight Show stage like he owned the world, or at least the tough streets he had grown up in, the kind of streets where every step could be a challenge and every corner held a story. The audience immediately sensed something different that night. Rodney's style was always self-deprecating, sharp, and unpredictable, but tonight there was an extra edge to him, a rawness that made his presence almost magnetic. You could feel it the moment he stepped under the bright studio lights, a man who had faced life's hardest punches and had learned to throw a few of his own, now ready to take the audience along for the ride. His expression, half sly grin, half alert caution, hinted at the stories he was about to unfold. Stories of survival, absurdity, and laughter carved straight from real life. Each step he took seemed deliberate, as if he was marking the territory of his humor, reminding everyone watching that comedy wasn't just about jokes. It was about experience. And Rodney had plenty of it. The stage itself felt alive under his feet. Rodney had a way of transforming even the sterile, polished environment of a late-night set into a reflection of the streets he came from. He spoke with a rhythm that mimicked life in a rough neighborhood, quick, chaotic, sometimes interrupted by an imaginary shout or the imagined bark of a neighbor's dog. The audience could almost hear the sounds of those streets in his cadence, the distant honk of a taxi, the rattle of a broken mailbox, the hiss of a curiously menacing alley cat. Every pause he took was intentional, drawing viewers in, making them lean closer to catch the punchline that would inevitably hit like a sudden twist in a suspenseful story. Rodney's body language added layers to his words. He shifted slightly, gestured with subtle exaggeration, and occasionally glanced around as if making sure the imaginary streets he was describing were listening along with everyone in the studio. It was a performance, yes, but one rooted deeply in truth, and that authenticity made it impossible to look away. Rodney's humor that night carried the grit of a man who had survived life's toughest corners. He spoke of neighbors who were more suspicious than friendly, of alleyways where trouble seemed to lurk in every shadow, and of the strange, unspoken rules that governed his old neighborhood. But he didn't just tell stories, he made the audience feel them. You could almost step into those alleys, hear the echo of laughter bouncing off brick walls, smell the faint aroma of street food, and feel the tension of being both cautious and curious. And yet, despite the hardships he painted, the humor never felt forced or mean-spirited. It was a clever dance between danger and comedy, a delicate balance that only someone who had truly lived it could pull off. Rodney's eyes sparkled with mischief as he recounted even the darkest moments, and the audience laughed not just at the absurdity, but at the truth hidden beneath every line. Every joke carried weight because it was anchored in reality. Every laugh was an acknowledgement that life, no matter how tough, could always be transformed into something beautiful and funny. Even Johnny Carson, who had seen countless comedians take the stage, seemed caught in Rodney's magnetic pull. The camera often captured Carson leaning slightly forward, a smile tugging at the corners of his face, eyes wide as if to say, "How does he do it?" It wasn't just Rodney's words. It was the way he lived them, breathed them, and handed them to the audience like a carefully wrapped present, full of surprise and delight. That night, the Tonight Show stage didn't feel like a studio. It felt like a living, breathing part of Rodney's world, a world where survival and laughter were inseparable companions, and where every joke reminded viewers that even the harshest realities could be transformed into comedy gold. By the end of the set, the audience wasn't just laughing, they were transported. Rodney had taken them on a journey through his streets, through his struggles, and through his triumphs, all without ever leaving the stage. Each line, each gesture, each carefully timed pause built a portrait of a man who had faced life head-on and returned with something priceless: the ability to make people laugh in the face of everything. That night, Rodney Dangerfield wasn't just a comedian. He was a storyteller, a magician turning the gritty, raw corners of his world into a spectacle of joy and laughter, leaving a mark on Johnny Carson's stage and the hearts of everyone watching that would never be forgotten. Living in a tough neighborhood, Rodney began, pausing just long enough for the audience to lean in, Makes you appreciate the little things. Like surviving a conversation without someone yelling at you. The crowd erupted, laughter echoing through the studio as if they were experiencing the streets Rodney described firsthand. Johnny Carson leaned forward, the corners of his mouth twitching with anticipation, his eyes scanning Rodney carefully. He had seen hundreds of comedians, but Rodney was different. Unpredictable, sharp, and capable of turning even the simplest observation into a full-blown comedic event. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Every eye in the studio was fixed on Rodney, waiting to see where his next line would land. Would it hit the mark? Would it push the boundaries? With Rodney, there was no predicting it, and that unpredictability was part of the thrill. As he continued, Rodney painted his neighborhood in vivid strokes. He spoke of streets where every passerby seemed suspicious, of neighbors who had perfected the art of glaring without saying a word, and of the little victories that defined daily survival. A simple walk to the corner store became an adventure worthy of a comedy sketch. The audience could almost see the cracked sidewalks, hear the distant shouts, and smell the mixture of hot asphalt and city life as Rodney described it. But he didn't just recount hardships, he transformed them into humor. Every anecdote, every facial expression, and every pause he took was carefully designed to turn tension into laughter. The jokes weren't just funny, they were dangerously relatable. For anyone who had ever felt the eyes of a judgmental neighbor, or the weight of an unforgiving street, Rodney's words resonated deeply. They laughed not just because it was amusing, but because it rang true. Johnny Carson, ever the consummate host, tried to maintain his composure behind the desk, but even he couldn't hide his reaction. A raised eyebrow, a slight chuckle, a subtle shake of his head, all signaled the magic Rodney was weaving. It was more than a performance. It was storytelling rooted in reality. Rodney's neighborhood wasn't just a backdrop for jokes, it was a living, breathing character in his narrative, full of quirks, dangers, and unexpected humor. By the end of that segment, the studio wasn't just laughing at a comedian's routine. They were immersed in the life and world of Rodney Dangerfield, seeing the humor and humanity in places most would overlook, and appreciating the genius behind every punchline that made his tough world strangely, irresistibly hilarious. Then came the story about a neighbor threatening Rodney, a moment so absurd, so startlingly real, that the audience wasn't sure whether to gasp in shock or burst out laughing. Rodney didn't just tell the story. He lived it on stage. Every word, every gesture, every pause was meticulously crafted to build tension, while simultaneously delivering punchlines that cut through the suspense like a sharp blade. He described the encounter with vivid detail. The neighbor's scowl, the way he waved a fist, the absurd reason behind the threat, all the while exaggerating just enough to make the danger both terrifying and hilariously unbelievable. It was a delicate balance, and Rodney pulled it off flawlessly. The audience could feel the adrenaline in the room, the mix of fear and anticipation that made every joke hit with double the impact. Carson, ever the composed host, tried to maintain his signature calm behind the desk. He leaned back slightly, suppressing a smile while keeping his eyes wide, scanning Rodney's every movement. It was as if he were witnessing magic unfold, a man turning a potentially tense, even frightening story into a roller coaster of laughter and suspense. The audience responded in kind, leaning forward in their seats, caught between disbelief and amusement. Some covered their mouths to stifle laughter. Others shook their heads in awe, marveling at Rodney's ability to make the unimaginable feel almost real. His timing was impeccable. Each beat, each pause made the punchlines land harder, making the room vibrate with laughter. Even the crew off stage struggled to hold back their smiles. Camera operators, producers, and stagehands exchanged amused glances, knowing they were witnessing a comedic master at work. Rodney's physicality added layers to the story. A cautious lean to the left, a mocking glance over his shoulder, a stiffened stance as if bracing for an invisible blow. Every movement amplified the absurdity, making the audience feel as though they were standing right in the middle of that tense street corner. The danger was palpable, but the humor made it irresistible. By the time Rodney delivered the final line of the story, the audience erupted in unrestrained laughter. Carson finally allowed himself to chuckle, his usually controlled demeanor giving way to the infectious energy Rodney had created. The entire studio was alive, caught in a perfect storm of suspense, absurdity, and hilarity. That night, Rodney didn't just tell a story. He transformed a simple neighborhood encounter into an unforgettable performance, one that blurred the line between real danger and comedic genius, leaving everyone, on stage and off, utterly captivated. Rodney's anecdotes painted the neighborhood in vibrant, unforgettable detail. He described the constant barking of stray dogs that seemed to patrol the streets with more authority than the local police, the neighbors who peered suspiciously from behind curtains as if every move he made required careful scrutiny, and the small, bizarre incidents that could escalate into full-blown chaos in a matter of seconds. But Rodney didn't just narrate these scenes. He inhabited them, letting the audience feel every tension-filled moment with a mix of fear and humor. Every punchline landed like a mini-explosion, hitting the crowd with perfect timing, making them laugh not just at the absurdity, but at the uncomfortable truth embedded in each joke. People leaned forward in their seats, eager to catch every word, every inflection, as if missing a single line would mean losing a piece of the story's magic. Carson, a master of timing and subtle humor himself, couldn't help but double over at Rodney's relentless energy. He smiled, chuckled, and shook his head in disbelief, the sheer force of Rodney's storytelling pulling him out of his usual composed persona. The interplay between the two legends, Rodney's wild, unpredictable delivery and Carson's understated reactions, created a rhythm that made the performance feel alive, almost cinematic. Every pause, every exaggerated gesture, every perfectly timed punchline contributed to a sense of immersion, transporting the audience from the comfort of the studio into the rough-and-tumble streets Rodney had survived. That night, it wasn't merely a comedy routine. It was an experience and a journey into Rodney's world where danger, absurdity, and humor intertwined seamlessly. The audience laughed, gasped, and marveled at his ability to turn everyday neighborhood chaos into a performance that was both painfully real and hilariously entertaining. By the time the segment ended, viewers didn't just remember the jokes, they remembered the world he had created. A world that was as dangerous as it was uproariously funny. When the show ended, the applause didn't fade immediately. Carson looked at Rodney and simply said, "Man, you bring the streets to life." And that's Rodney Dangerfield, turning life's toughest neighborhoods into timeless laughter. For viewers, it wasn't just a joke. It was a story that stayed with them long after the cameras stopped rolling.